I am the music industry liaison to Creative Victoria, and that's a part-time role that's a secondment from my other role, which is as the General Manager of the Victorian Music Development Office. So the VMDO has been in existence now for about 2 years, and I've been the GM the whole time. Prior to that, I was an artist manager. I had my own artist management business for about 10 years. And then before that, worked as assistant manager for some other management companies, and also I started at the Falls Festival, and concurrently with my management role was also producer of the Melbourne Laneway Festival for about 10 years. I started another little arts festival in Queenscliff. I did programming for a number of other projects and ran production for things. So kind of a bit of an all-rounder over about 15 years. You know, the kind of growth year on year for music had been, was kind of being demonstrated that there was that growth after a period of kind of decline probably 10 to 15 years ago, and then sort of plateauing out, and we started to see a bit of an uplift. And I think that on the live side in particular, it was really feeling, very positive. New venues, lots of touring opportunities. I think in terms of sort of local artists internationally, had rarely seen anything like it. So there was sort of, I think, it was feeling like a really, really positive space. Certainly at the VMDO, we were looking at new markets and kind of, very much what was going to be the next thing that would be happening, and feeling really positive and optimistic about all of that sort of stuff. I can see that there were some pretty significant systemic gaps that maybe were being even covered over by the live income model, and that there were, I guess, there's some disparity in terms of the way that that artists were being paid. That maybe was hidden a little bit by the way that that buoyancy kind of made things look. So it made us very vulnerable to something like this, where suddenly live's gone, and the sort of gap between the way that people earn money other than live is being really brought out into the open. And I think probably in some ways the optimism was really warranted, but it also, maybe there was a little bit that we weren't necessarily paying as much attention to that's now really come to the fore. The idea that live would be gone altogether is just not something I think that was on anyone's radar. So from that perspective, I do think that, maybe that was, whether you would say that that's taken for granted or just that this is unprecedented. I don't think we necessarily could have guarded against something like this, because I just think it seemed so unlikely that it would ever happen. So, I do think that the other thing is a kind of exponential growth and expectation of that to continue. Now that we look at the potential shrinking of the economy overall over a longer period of time, some of that is also about readjusting ideas of what's, what does success look like and what do people want to do. And for some artists that I've spoken to, there's an element that not needing to be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger is actually, there's some positives to that for some individuals. Obviously for others, it's really difficult to think, that particularly, when there was an upward trajectory in an artist's career, that now is just sort of completely feels unknown. And what happens to that? How do you reconnect? How do you get back to where you were with that momentum? There's so many questions like that I think, really challenging for people. But it's also interesting now that we're into, week 17 or whatever it is, having seen early on where it was this kind of constant adjusting, constant pivoting, constant sort of resetting of goals to different timelines. I feel like now there's much more from people, let's just wait and see, and let's kind of regroup and make new plans when we have a little bit more concrete to kind of build on, because otherwise just the exhaustion of constantly trying to change within an ever-changing context. It's one thing, I think music's used to being disrupted, but usually by technology or something where you kind of, once it happens, then you need to readjust all your business models and figure out how you're going to operate in this new world. Not that it will be disrupted every couple of weeks to such a massive degree. It's really interesting because in some ways I think, there were things that we maybe couldn't or didn't feel like we could necessarily address or change while it was happening because, almost in some ways, everything's stopping and then, from a life perspective, that is, and then almost being kind of raised to the ground means that the opportunity is there to build it back better or to build it back in a way that better reflects, a context that you would like to see. Having said that, I think that the issue there is that as soon as we have the opportunity to build it back, everyone's just going to need to do it immediately. So it's kind of that thing where it's easy, hindsight's 2020, so is foresight in some ways, that you can say, look, what we would like to do is to make sure that we, really address these things and really unpack this stuff and look at the ways that we can do this better. But in a lot of ways too, we also just need to get back to business as usual. So it'll be interesting to see what opportunity there really is to kind of make those fundamental changes. And some of them will be about the whole system of how something works. There's kind of, I think we've inherited ways of doing business or particularly ways, I guess, of for value to be transferred that hark back to a very long time ago in a really different model. And even when we look at things like streaming and we look at the fact that, I feel like music's often trying to retrofit to, to the pathway to consumers that's being put in front of us. So in some ways, in that instance, actually looking at ways that there's lawsuits happening at the moment for the royalty rates on things that are kind of already in place. And so, we kind of lose our leverage because that stuff is already happening. So what have we got really to convince someone to give us a better deal? And that's just one example of where I think that is sort of, you can see that in many, many facets of the industry. And one of the things I think has been really interesting is seeing the way that, where live performance, for instance, has come back, people are prepared to pay a lot more per ticket because they might only be, one of 50 at a seated kind of show or something like that. But just seeing that, it suddenly disrupts that idea that this is what the market can handle, because actually that recognition that, well, there might be 50 people that can handle a lot more because they're real dyed-in-the-wool fans than what, we've kind of got these models that are based on lowest common denominator. And so, obviously there's sort of certain experiences that you might offer just for smaller groups. But I think this has definitely created an opportunity for us to really look at the way that we engage with audiences and particularly with fans, and to see whether, are there other ways of constructing this, I guess, this value proposition for people that doesn't presume that they just want to pay like, $20 for a ticket. I think back to the announcement that shows over 500 would be cancelled, and that definitely felt significant. And then very quickly after that, I guess it was as much about this sort of friction between legislation or rules and also public sentiment. And so that there were venues then that were smaller, that were sort of still running shows, that were sort of copying it from general public saying you shouldn't be open. And it was very much, though, I think, felt like, let's just get this done and then we can get back to normal. And I think that's probably, where I look back to March and think, if only you knew, it's not just going to be, get over this and then go back to normal, that it's going to go on a lot longer. The fact that we're now back in lockdown after sort of a moment of looking like we were on a trajectory, something like New Zealand, where we could sort of ease back in and end up back in relatively normal life, definitely feels, I guess I feel a lot less optimistic in some ways right now than I did in March, because I didn't really know what was ahead. But, it also is probably just a result of us being in week one of re-lockdown, that I'll probably be fine in a couple of days. Just to dwell on the positives for a minute, but one of the really amazing things has been the way that the industry's come together, and, the kind of communication and positivity and creativity that it's come from within the industry, and the sort of willingness, I guess, of people who've maybe never worked together before, arch nemesis in some cases, to actually join forces and really pull together has been really amazing. Speaking to artists from a whole range of backgrounds who say, well, I don't have recorded music. I've just always played live, or I don't have any merch. I don't have these, there's sort of, that's where I think, looking at the way that people have been operating in this sector has been so varied that the impacts for one might be very different from another. And so I think it's been just, when you sort of looking at it and thinking, wow, that's tough, and then you talk to someone and think, wow, that's even tougher, that kind of constant uncovering of new levels of challenges has been really, really, really tough. But I think also just seeing as we go on, the sort of surety of things coming back to normal. Even the fact that, I think the way that our industry is so interconnected that, you've got festivals that can help, underpin a tour in some ways, or that you're working towards, that can, open up artists to a whole new audience, and certainly to, return higher fees than what they might get just playing a one-off show. Like, there's all these things, but these things require then that festival still exists, and those venues still exist, and that audience is still there and confident to go and do things. And there's I think that's where it starts to be looking ahead and thinking, how long can all these people hold on? How long can this sort of, I guess, the infrastructure that has been built stay in place, so that when the doors are reopened, everything's there to kind of go back to. I had a really amazing example of that, was a production manager that I spoke to who usually works on festivals. And he sort of said, look, he said, this is not in my own best interest, but I think it might be better if festivals don't come back this summer, just to give the venues that are there 365 days of the year an opportunity to get a toehold back onto, for them to be the place that everyone goes to not split focus and not have audiences choosing between going to the sideshow or the festival, things like that, where you think, wow, that's someone who has literally got no work saying, I think I should continue to have no work a bit longer, so that the underpinning sort of structures can be shored up before we put this next layer on top. And I think that's exactly what you're speaking to. Like, that's the thing that's been, as well as the day-to-day collaboration and the sort of sharing of ideas, there's also been the willingness of people to say, okay, I understand that this industry is kind of all interconnected, and if one thing needs to be stronger before this next one, comes back online, then that's kind of what should happen. So it's been remarkable from that perspective. And I think, as you say, like those old rivalries are sort of all, put to bed at the moment. I don't know how long they'll last. Just seeing the fact that streaming has been really embraced by people. And I saw today the announcement that of the new TV show that's coming back onto the ABC, sort of seeing things like that where, it's really exciting to see that there's maybe new patterns of behaviour, or that those patterns of behaviour that maybe were there anyway, people like watching music, has been highlighted, and now there's an opportunity for that to hopefully go on into the future. I think there's been really positive things like that. But also, I think, to me, it's been the revelation of, new song releases that just blow you away, and remembering that that's actually what this is kind of about, and that those artists are still out there making incredible work in the face of these challenges. That's been the real big one for me, is to think, that I guess there's a sort of confidence then in the fact that whatever's going to happen, people are still going to need music, and people are still going to make incredible music. And so there's sort of, I guess, a level of confidence there that I'm trying to let go of the need to try to figure out what's going to happen, and be a little bit maybe more zen about it, to say, look, it's just going to roll out as it does. And the fact that there is this drive for artists and audiences to connect will ensure that, we come back in whatever form that ends up looking like. There's examples like the Save Our Scene venues campaign was the most subscribed to e-petition in the history of Victoria, and things like that, where you sort of go, that's a really nice reminder that the music lovers of Melbourne and Victoria are really out there in force, and really willing to get behind the protection of music in whatever form it kind of takes. So I think yeah, it's been really interesting to have that demonstrated, and the same with, you know, being able to see the live streaming numbers, to know what people in their houses will kind of, how they're engaging, and also just seeing, like, I know the sort of general stats on things like music streaming and music consumption in general has all gone up, and it has all changed, where it's much more sort of less background music and more kind of real interaction and more discovery, and maybe a more in-depth sort of look at the way that people are connecting with music. So I think it's hard to know whether that was happening anyway, but in all the noise, we didn't necessarily notice it as much, or if it has genuinely changed. But I think either way, the result is we've got a much better picture in some ways of, just how vital music is to people. And it's, again, hard to say what that looks like on the other side, but the confidence that just that fact alone, I think, gives us all is, that this isn't inevitable, that music's not going anywhere, and audiences are definitely there, ready to come back as soon as they can. And in the meantime, I think the more that we find other ways of connecting artists and audiences, the better. That I think that, you know, because we don't know how long it's going to be before we can stand in front of the main stage at, you know, the festival. But in the meantime, just seeing, you know, there was something recently, some of those shows in the little window when they happened, you know, there were seated punk shows and things that people just couldn't wait to get to, and, you know, couldn't, just hung off every minute. And yeah, it's just a really good reminder, I think, of just how much we need to get back there. You know, it's been really interesting, and particularly like the example that I gave of people who don't necessarily have recorded music but have just played live, you know, in some cases for years, and to such a degree that they either haven't had time to record anything, or it just didn't come up. You know, that there's sort of, I think, from that perspective, there's a real opportunity there to, and particularly with underrepresented artists, to kind of find opportunities to connect them more broadly with, you know, kind of more mainstream audiences as well. So I think there's certainly barriers that things like streaming have kind of shown, that, you know, whether it's access, or geography, or just a whole range of different things, that when those barriers are taken away, as they are through streaming, that there are people connecting who maybe haven't, you know, we may not have seen that connection in the past. That's not to say streaming's the be all and end all and can replace live music, but it's just good to kind of see, okay, we've been missing a lot of people, and, you know, if going forward and in that rebuild we can really address those things, then I think, you know, we can build it back better. But it's also looking systemically at, you know, a lot of the people who've ended up really vulnerable out of this situation are not necessarily the ones that you might have expected, and I think there's something there in terms of the way that those sort of structures are set up, and where the money kind of goes to, as well as the opportunities and the visibility and all those kind of things. Just something that I think, again, we knew it, but this has really highlighted the fact that we kind of need to do something about it. When I think about the gigs that I sat on the couch and thought, nah, can't be bothered going tonight, and now I think if I could go back and go to all those shows, I would 100. I was absolutely taking that for granted, and that's on that micro sort of individual level. I think that, you know, there'll be plenty of people who can identify with that. I mean, I think the hope is, and as well, as I said, the inevitability is that the community will just stay together as it does. And, you know, that's been one of the things, just you know, I've been really sort of concerned about mental health for people at this time, and seeing some of the things that have kind of popped up where, you know, the care given to each other has been just remarkable. And I think that demonstration to continue, and, you know, people having maybe a bit more time, as they have lately, or just without the, you know, the white noise of everything else, like, I don't know, leaving the house, but that ability to kind of connect, with each other is something that I really hope we can continue. And like you said before, that collaboration, like, I think the more that we can just continue to work together as the whole of ecosystem, and recognise that the more that we do that, and the more that we sort of refer to the needs of every part of that, the better we are set up to kind of move forward, and to make sure that everyone's included in that process. that's I think the real hope for me is that, we come out of this stronger in terms of those connections and that collaboration, and continue to work together